Hey everyone, welcome back. This is a continuation of part 1 where I talked about what I took on the Trans-American Trail.
So while we're on the back left side of the vehicle roughly, I'll talk about what I had on top. Nice and simple. I have a shovel for when nature calls, let's say it that way. But realistically, it's also used for digging and getting yourself unstuck if need be, whatever needed for. Really simple. I have these little rubberized grommets. They just snap down over it, just like that. Held it perfectly in place. It would jiggle around, but it isn't going back or forward any. Traveled 10,000 miles like it with that. Now up here on top is where I would keep my Husqvarna chainsaw. It had its own case that it would lay on its side, as well as, it's fully protected. I'll maybe put a picture in here, but it's a chainsaw. What do you want me to say? If you want to know the exact detail and exact about, what chainsaws to get, we can talk about that. Just let me know. But super simple. Inside of there, I also had my chaps for my chainsaw, which I definitely recommend if you're going to be using chainsaws, because we like to keep our legs. So that was in there, as well as some basic wedges, which I'd use with my little hand axe or my small axe. And let's see what else I kept in there. A basic way to sharpen my chain, a fresh sharp chain on there, and some oil for the bar. And then of course right here, the mixed oil for it, or excuse me, mixed gas for it, which was inside the vehicle, which I'm gonna find somewhere else to put that down the road. And since I didn't talk about it a second ago, here is my axe that I took with me. Now it is nice and sharp, has a little cover over it. You can also use it to hit wedges with. It technically says not to do this with it, but if you gotta drive a wedge to get your chain unstuck or move a tree or whatever the need, you can use it, just use caution and be smart about it. But I really like this axe. I've used it quite a bit. It's just a Husky axe, really simple, straightforward. Now we move up to the right rear door, which is where I keep my tools. Now my tools will be in here, some spares, which I'll talk about in a minute exactly what I have. My clothes would be here because it's really convenient to get in and out as far as how this setup went. Some vitamins, as well as some spare oil, and my main sleeping bag or my backup sleeping bag would be right there. And back through there is those containers that we'll talk about in a minute. But basically this whole section where the original back right seat would be is where all my tools would be. So now let's move on to talking about what I kept in my tool area. Now we have my vitamins, personal vitamins, whatever you take, that's where I kept my vitamins. A basic towel, get wet, dry yourself off. In here is where I would keep my clothes. Nice and simple to get to, didn't need them every day, but it's set on top of my tools, which I'll show in a second. Now back there is my 30-degree sleeping bag that I was talking about. That's tucked up out of the way because, that's only used for when it gets real cold, which we never got into real cold temperatures, thankfully. Now, over here we have a Adu battery jump kit, which can start the battery. It's really simple. You can charge your phone with it, which defeats the purpose in my opinion, because it drains the battery, and then if you gotta start your vehicle, the battery's drained. So that is solely for jump starting the vehicle if the battery was to die. Very handy. Coolant, 50-50 blend for your vehicle. Nice and simple, straightforward. Some drains out, whatever happens, you've got some. That's a spare. For the trip, for the Trans-American Trail, you're really preparing for possibilities, not likelihoods, but possibilities. Generally you could pretty much be close to town the majority of the time. But if you're one of the times when you're out in the desert or somewhere and you blow a radiator hose, you got some fluid, and I've got 8 gallons of water usually, even though that's not concentrate, you could put that in there, put the spare radiator hose, which we'll get to in a second, and limp your way back to town. So most of this stuff here is about preparing for, things that could happen, but not likely to happen. So now we'll talk about oil. Now, it's used right now, but I had a full spare change of oil and an oil filter. Use your preferred brand. And if I have anything to say about that, I recommend quality synthetic oil. There's all kind of debates on blends and whatnot and so forth, but just use a quality oil of whatever kind. Now, here's the big box of spares. There's quite a lot in here. Now, the belts. I have every single belt this vehicle uses, which is, I believe there's one for the AC, there's one for the alternator, and one for the power steering pump. I have one of each. In case one breaks or something happens, I can replace it. Simple. Now, here's something I read on a forum, is baling wire. You know, really simple, but I was reading about it and this guy was like, hey, you could be surprised at how many uses this thing has. And I was thinking about it. You know, if a bumper comes off a little bit, you know, plastic one, you could weave it back together or whatever, right? You know, this is just spares and things to help fix small problems. Now, this, you know, you can probably tell what these are, terminals. But the reason I got these was because in Oklahoma, when we got ran out of my camping spot that one night, the vehicle was giving me trouble and I wasn't sure what was wrong. Now, it turned out that the terminal post had came loose a little bit. So I thought I was going to have to replace them. So I bought 2 new ones, specific for how mine are set up, and ended up never needing it because the problem never came again. So I keep these with me just in case. They're a couple bucks. Simple. You know, some gloves for working on when it's oily and dirty. Now in here, we have quite a few things. So in this lovely little box, we have quite a few different things. I have my tire kit that I plugged my tire with in Oregon, as well as some contact cement, which comes with the kit. You know, some caps, simple. But most important, I'd consider in here is spare light bulbs. I have a spare light bulb for all the light bulbs, right? One for the headlights, which is actually in here. Here's my spare headlight. I got one for turn signals, rear, all the brake lights. You know, simple. You know, spares. That's basically the entire point of what was in there is spares. So, some more gloves, and that's basically it, as well as some white chalk for marking air leaks or anything like that. But in here is basically tire related and some spares for light bulbs. We've got a few things left in this box, a few basic things, some spare little caps for the door panels and stuff like that for plastics. WD-40, very handy. Now, one trick I learned from a master locksmith was do not buy the granite or graphite style sprays for locks. And I was like, well, why? That stuff's made for it, right? Technically, it says it is. He said, what it does is, yeah, it gives it friction and it turns. But what happens is, as water gets in there, moisture gets in there, it's just graphite, which is basically just sand. And that sand and graphite turns into cement. And basically what you do is you just make the locks and tumblers more abrasive and wear down your keys and your tumblers that quicker. WD-40, nice and simple. You can spray it in there to unjam a locked, key cylinder, or what you have it. Now, more spare fluids. This is more just like real spare. I have some spare transmission fluid specific for my vehicle, which for my research, the true genuine Mitsubishi transmission oil, which is what I've used to change mine, is the way to go. Personal preferences, but that's just what I use. In here is my OBD2 scanner. So that way if I have a check engine light, I can read it or clear it or know what's going on with the vehicle on a relatively basic to moderate level. Next, we have a electrical tool for measuring voltage, or a voltmeter. Nice and simple. I got a good quality one because I've used cheaper ones and they wear out, and I have a nice good one for working on anything electrical. Now here's another thing, emergency tape. It is good for patching just about anything, like it says. Holds to 950 psi, 8,000 volts, and 500 degrees Fahrenheit. So you could technically wrap up a radiator hose and get that fixed again. because it is self-fusing to itself, meaning that when you wrap it over itself, it bonds itself to it chemically and literally becomes one piece. So that's cool. I've used this stuff before, but nice and handy to have in emergencies. So last in here is wheel studs. Now I have 3 for the front and 3 for the rear because they are different. Now, as well as I have some lug nuts, spare lug nuts for each of them. Now the reason I have these, as well as I have, a little basic scribble on them to tell me if they're front or back, because they are slightly different, is I remember watching a video years ago about these guys that were traveling in Alaska. I think it was Expedition Overland was who they were. And their, what was it? They had a Land Cruiser, and they had lost 4 out of their 6 lug nuts and wheel studs in the rear, and had to go to a local hardware store and hopefully have them, and they had to order them. So this is why I have these. Just in case, I figured, Trans-American Trail, pretty rough. Nice to have them. Didn't use them, but I have them. In here is my nice bag of tricks and treats. In here is all my basic tools. Granted, some of this is a little bit excessive, and down the road, that's quite a bit of tools, right? Those are my sockets and things I've acquired. I will want to reduce the weight of this, just because my vehicle was actually close to its gross vehicle weight on this trip. So this will be part of the process of shaving some weight off as we go. But this is what I took. You got your basic tools, a nice quality impact for taking off tires, but not torquing them down. I will say that. Some wire strippers, always handy. And then, your regular assortment of needle nose pliers, flathead screwdrivers, a hammer for banging on stuff if need be. This is one thing specific for my vehicle. If I had to change any snap rings off, because there's a couple things that need this tool, I would have it. But luckily didn't need it. That's kind of the point of this bag. Some vice grips, 1 pair of adjustable, wrenches, some scrapers, and a cold chisel. You make up the bag however you want to, but this is what I took. And in this bag, I've always heard that if you want to know if it's built correctly, pull it out and try to work from it, right? So for me, I was working on the Montero before my trip, and I was pulling this bag out and using tools from it, and didn't need to get extra. So that's kind of one indication that you got what you need. Now to cover the last few things I have in the Montero are my tools. It's a nice, comprehensive toolkit with some stuff I've added, like more sockets and extensions and a torque wrench, and so on and so forth. But this will, like I said a second ago, I want to reduce the overall weight of my tools and reduce this a little bit, but for now, that's what I took. Now, we have some more spares. I have I believe this is my lower radiator hose, upper radiator hose, as well as a spare windshield wiper for the rear, just because they're kind of hard to get for my vehicle. I had to order the original one. So I just ordered another one. They're a couple bucks, and they don't hardly weigh anything. Now, why are these wrapped, you ask? That's because when they're brand new, they smell. They don't smell bad, but leave them in a hot vehicle and come back into it, it smells like hot rubber. So when you wrap them, it doesn't really smell as bad. You don't smell them. Now, one thing I forgot to mention was my jack stand. Granted, it is bulky and does weigh a few pounds, but when working on the vehicle, when you're under it, taking tires off, or whatever you got to do, I like having a real jack stand versus just having like a bottle jack under there, right? This gives me a little more peace of mind. Now, another thing I will say, I'm not going to bring it out. It's just a basic bottle jack that came with the vehicle. I do not like it. It's too small. One thing I'd like to get is a better quality bottle jack in the future. That's one of the things I'm going to work on. There's some companies out there that make Overland specific jacks, but that's just kind of where I'm at right now. This takes up space and weight, but it's peace of mind, and I'm probably going to always keep some form of this in the vehicle. Now we move up to the front right seat. Now up here, I have a few different things. Now, for one, you can probably tell, maybe not, but this is a torque wrench that we got in, what was it, Tennessee, where we almost lost our wheel. Now up in front, we have my compressor from ARB. Highly recommend a compressor, especially if you're going to be airing up and airing down quite a lot. On my trip, we aired up and down quite a lot, and having a quality compressor is well worth the money. The money that you spend on a quality compressor, what you really pay for is its ability to do 100% duty cycle, meaning it can run non-stop. It doesn't have to run 5 minutes and be off 5 minutes. So that was worth the money. I'm glad I bought it. Now up in here, which we'll pull this out and talk more, is my cords for the winch, recovery kit, which will be moving in the future, because if this door gets pinned and I can't get in here, I have no recovery kit. That's going to go somewhere more accessible. First aid kit. Always should have one. Right here, we have my binoculars. An old school pair of Japanese binoculars that are really good quality. Got it at a yard sale for $5. Super happy with them. Now, in the seat itself, we have another blanket. I took this with me, never used it. That's one of the things I wish I had left home. I had more blankets than necessary for my trip. In the glove box, we have a few simple things in here. I have a log book for the Montero. I logged my fuel and how often I needed to touch up my oil, how things were being in general for maintenance on the trip. This allows you to keep track of it, my MPGs, all that fun stuff. So something I recommend definitely keeping a maintenance log of at least knowing what you've done to your vehicle and how long ago, because then if something starts happening like, hey, this oil's down, then you can go back and say, hey, I changed the oil 1,000 miles ago. Well, clearly I got a leak somewhere. So that's just a really nice, simple way of keeping things in order. Now in here as well, Rain-X, very nice and handy. Some simple fuses of various kinds and shapes. Never used them, but definitely nice having spare fuses. In here is my remote controlled accessibility for my winch. Didn't use it because we didn't use the winch, but that stays in there. Now, as well as this, which is a quick access socket for my wheels as well as the wheel key. Nice and simple, but this allows me not to have to dig through 10 different sets of tools just to change a wheel if we get a flat. Nice and easy. Earplugs. Nice and handy for when working on using the chainsaw. Now, this is something I don't think anybody's ever talked about. This is a spare key cylinder for my ignition. The reason I have one of these, I was at an Overland festival a couple years ago and got in my vehicle, and I was about to go through and do some driving courses. Couldn't start the vehicle. Wiggled with the key a while and figured out that the key had worn down and just over time and use would no longer move the tumblers or the keys correctly inside the cylinder to crank or to unlock it. That means I'm dead in the water. If you cannot unlock the steering wheel to turn it on, you cannot remove them generally. So that means you basically have to bust them out if you cannot unlock it at least one click. So I was luckily able to get it to run, drove to town, got a spare one, swapped it out. They're super simple. And in here is actually the new part. So what I did was I went to a local locksmith and took him the old key cylinder. He went through and actually readjusted it so my current key will still work in it. Now, this is in here just in case in the future that it locks up. I can swap it out real quick and keep going. This is well worth the money. It's only a couple bucks really in total. It's really worth it. So now, least but not last, we're going to talk about what was in the front right seat floorboard. Now, we talked about it a little bit a minute ago, but we'll talk a little more in depth with what I had specifically up there. Now, here's my air compressor. It's ARB. It is a single high output compressor, just basically meaning it's got a single pump versus a dual pump setup. I liked this setup better than having like fully mounted air pumps One reason being that there's not that much space under the hood for a big dual setup air pump. And that also means more complexity. Simpler is better. Now in here, it's a basic setup. It plugs straight in onto the battery, has a fuse right here, plenty of elastic style cordage where it'll roll out, get all the way around the vehicle to one side, and then you go back up and around and then down to the other. Nice and simple. I like ARBs because there's clicks on and stays on when airing up. Usually for me, and I run 31-inch tires, it would take from 20 psi to 35 psi like 2 minutes, you know, if that. Not long ago. So I really like that. Now, one of the advantages of having a bigger compressor is you can take off this fitting, right? Because it just, you know, normal pneumatic fitting like that, and put on a little blower, right? A little compressor blower, like, psh, right? Can't think of the name of them right now. But with this one, it does not create enough volume of air to run a compressor and have a blower on at the same time. It's enough to air the tires up, but it doesn't output enough air to be able to blow stuff off like a compressor would of a bigger size. One of the downsides to it, not a big deal for me. I prefer the smaller size, which it all fits in this nice little box. And of course, you can always work on these. That's what I liked about this. And also, like I mentioned earlier, this is a 100% duty cycle, meaning it can run non-stop without needing to be turned off and cooled down for X amount of minutes. One of the things I liked about this one. Moving on, we have my remote control for the winch. Basic, simple, straightforward. And then we have our torque wrench. It is a torque wrench that goes from, I think, 50 all the way up to 250 pounds. Actually, it says right there, 25 to 250. I use this for making sure my lug nuts are torqued down, which is handy. Quality tool to begin with, not top tier, but good quality. Now we have our recovery kit. You know, it's a basic. This is something still to be, you know, expanded on and grown upon. But this is a starter kit from Warren. Inside of here, we have a pair of gloves. You have a shackle, which is rated for more than my vehicle weighs, and including the weight amount that you would put on it while using it, of course. You know, all this nice complex figures and numbers and things that we've learned in Overland school, but we forget them when we're talking about them. We've got a D-shackle up in there, and another one, and some tree straps. Clearly haven't used them, which, you know, as a future video, we'll get this out, talk about it a little more if you want, and practice, right? Practice makes perfect. So that was my recovery kit, which I'm actually going to be moving in the future and putting that somewhere that's more accessible if for some reason I get stuck and can't open my front right door. Now, the last two things I keep on the front right seat in that general area was first aid kit, you know, basic, you know, semi-comprehensible, you know, like it'll do basic stuff. You know, there's more real good quality ones that are better suited, but this was good enough for my trip. And you know, if you cut yourself real bad, you can at least stop it. Now, another thing I took was these binoculars. These were really nice. I got these at a yard sale, like I mentioned. They're just old school Japanese style, or made in Japan, I should say, binoculars. They were really nice when, you know, out in the fields, you know, of what were we, like Oregon and Oklahoma, and you wanted to see as far as you could see. Those are real nice. So there we have it. That is what I took with me on my Trans-American Trail and the Mighty Montero. Now, there's a few things that I wish I had done differently or had taken with me or didn't. One of the things I definitely wish I had with me was a simpler setup for my boxes. Like I said, in the future, I'm going to be building a dedicated platform for my, you know, Overland style refrigerator, as well as probably some drawers that allow me to just pull a drawer out and get to what I need to, not without having to pull out two boxes to get to one thing. That to me was pretty tiresome. That's something I would fix differently if I had to do it again. Definitely having a dedicated refrigerator, definitely on that, even though they're kind of expensive if you get a good quality one. There's different versions of, you know, cooler refrigerators or Overland refrigerators in general, but a good quality one, they definitely cost a few pennies. But to me, having to deal with ice almost every single day and having to deal with the water, and then of course that water would get into all your food, no matter how hard you tried, even though I would put stuff into Ziploc bags, you know, like my sandwich meat into Ziploc bags, they would still get wet when the water melted and would ruin the food, and you'd have to start over again and buy new food. So that was really a big hassle for me. And I'd say one word of advice would be stuff you use every day, put it somewhere it's accessible, easy to get to. You know, semi common sense stuff. You know, like I'm gonna use toilet paper. I'm gonna set this somewhere simple, which I didn't mention that, but I had toilet paper. You know, and basic self amenities. You know, like toothpaste and hair stuff. You know, that's one of the things I didn't mention, but that was over where I kept my towel. You know, basic stuff. One other thing I didn't mention I had was a little handsaw next to my axe down there. Really handy for cutting up limbs. It was in Oklahoma. A tree had fell across the road, just barely blocking it. Instead of having to get out my big, massive chainsaw, or not really that big of a chainsaw, but getting at the chainsaw, going through all that, I just took the handsaw, cut it up, and kept going. Definitely like that. Let me think while I'm standing here if there's anything else. I mean, that's pretty much it. This video was to help give it a basic idea of what I took on the Trans-American Trail, some of the things I wish I had done differently, you know. In another video, we'll be talking about what mechanically I had to do to the vehicle to get it ready. Now, granted, you don't have to do any of these things. You don't have to have off-road tires if you really wanted to chance it. But you get my saying in that it's easier to prepare for the worst, but expect the best kind of deal. So in this, it was easier to make sure I had things mechanically secured. You know, like my transmission was serviced and what I did to this and that, and skid plates and all that fun stuff. I'll talk about that in another video. But this one was just to go through, give a basic idea of how I set things up, what I took on my trip, and then you can adjust this for your liking and for how you adventure. You know, some people tent camp. For me, I like sleeping in my vehicle. I can stay out of the dry, or not stay out of the dry, but stay dry, you know, and warm, relatively. You know, there's advantages and disadvantages. So, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. It was a little long-winded, granted, but it kind of takes time when you got to walk through what took me, 3 weeks probably to plan what's currently in my vehicle, and then more time even building the platform and figuring stuff out. So, it's a process. That's what I'd say. Start, if it's your first real big adventure, start out with small stuff, like, okay, I need this and that. Put that in there. Go do a weekend trip. Go spend a night in a campground, camp in your backyard, whatever, right? And be like, oh, I should have took that. And, just do it like that, and then it'll progress naturally, and, you'll know what you'll need. So, other than that, hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and we will see you in the next one. And remember to like and subscribe and share with your friends.